we're pursuing our inquiry further into holistic healing. And another term we want to put on the table is well-being. Some theologians, like Maximus the Confessor, built the concept of well-being into their theological system. Philosophers too have done this, notably Aristotle, who talked about eudaimonia, which is not just, it can be loosely translated as happiness, which is, yes, it's the goal of a human life, of a successful human life. This eudaimonia, I suppose, is tantamount to well-being, but it's not the same thing as hedone, pleasure. It's not simply pleasure seeking. It's more a deep-seated, metaphysically grounded sense of happiness and well-being. And Aristotle said that you can't have this eudaimonia without virtue. The way to achieve this happiness.
Though you do get it when you're very young.
When you're young, you have a youthful energy, you have an innocence and a trust in life, and maybe a more unclouded sense of what's possible, an undiminished idealism. You haven't accreted all that cynicism and skepticism that people acquire when they get older. Yeah, maybe there is a connection, but as we mature and as life weighs down on us, bears down on us, and most people lose their sense of optimism and idealism, unfortunately, which naturally belong to the young. And definitely there needs to be recovery of that sense. It is an integral part of eudaimonia. But for Aristotle, it's the practice of virtue that leads to happiness. So in other words, we can't just be leading an unvirtuous life and just expect to be healthy. An ingredient of holistic health is leading a good life, whatever that means. We talked about how spiritual error, sin if you like, can manifest in conditions, physical conditions. That's a hypothesis, but it's a religious tenet, but it's something that is worth exploring. And I think Aristotle's emphasis on virtue ties in neatly here too. So we have to act wisely, we have to act prudently, we have to act with the virtues. And well, the classical virtues were temperance, prudence, justice, and temperance, prudence, justice, and fortitude, courage. In many ways, courage is the root of the other virtues. If we are weak-willed and lack gumption and the courage to make the right decisions, it will interfere with our well-being. That follows logically. It'll interfere with our well-being, and I believe it will compromise our health. Courage often involves being able to make decisions that the masses don't want to go along with, but you need to do it because it's right. And then you need to take the decision in justice. And there needs to be a temperance and a moderation about how you weigh things up. Aristotle talked about the golden mean as representing a pathway of virtue. With virtuous action, you are trying to strike the mean between two extremes. For example, authentic courage would be the mean between foolhardy rashness, impetuosity on the one hand, and just cowardice and hiding under the bed on the other hand, just this fearful paralysis and cowardice, the inability to move, the inability to take action. On the other hand, you've got the situation of the fool rushing in where angels fear to tread. But authentic courage is the middle way between these two extremes. And in Aristotle's way of thinking, every virtue could be described as a mean between two extreme positions, both of which are unvirtuous, and the virtue lies in the middle road. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
It can't be extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Both extremes are bad.
Is it relevant? Was it relevant to the time of the pandemic?
Oh, yeah.
There was a lot of pressure on people and populations to behave in a certain way when it came to vaccination campaigns and so on. There's a lot of buyer's remorse now, and more of it is filtering through to the media.
Oh, we haven't even seen half of it.
Yeah, no, we haven't.
A lot of it's going to come out over the years.
And some of the detrimental effects were known, but they couldn't be published back in 2021 because there was a great censorship by the medical system.
Protect themselves.
Yes. So.
But I know that people won't be as stupid anymore. They're going to think twice.
Well, that's true. It won't be as docile a population. People will want
more evidence.
More evidence, yes, and more choice, and exercise that choice. And that takes courage to say, I'm going to go against the trend. As I say, lots of research was done during that period, but it was suppressed by government authorities controlling the medical system, and the medical system really to survive itself as part of the apparatus of power, it in some cases had to falsify evidence, like a famous article in The Lancet, and in other cases just had to suppress what the dissident voices were saying. Fully qualified medical voices, but they were dissident nevertheless. And a lot of people got vaccinations that they didn't need.
Exactly.
If you consider them vaccinations. Many don't. Many consider it a form of RNA technology, not your classic vaccine. And we've seen many cases of especially vascular disorders arising from this. Heart attacks in young men, fit people like sportsmen at the peak of their game. Myocarditis and other conditions. Yep, vascular derangements, among other conditions. So it's so easy for a so-called health system or medical system to be perverted in its means and its ends if it gets subordinated to another agenda. Was 2020-21, was that more about health measures, or was it more to do with a power grab? These questions are being asked. Some asked them at the time, but they weren't given a warm reception for asking those questions. So the first thing you want to know is this medicine a real medicine, or is it a bogus medicine? And with what energy is it being advanced? With what energy is it being pushed? I mean, this is common sense. It's not like, don't lose sight of the forest for the trees. You get so into the pharmacology and the chemistry of the thing that you miss the fact that this is a real opportunity for states to tighten their control and surveillance over their populations. This is also an opportunity for certain pharmaceutical companies to make a mozza. What are the motivations? Because if you buckle in the face of a bad motivation, it's going to have deleterious effects on your health and well-being. At no point can we abandon our common sense. Now, the vertical dimension of health would seem to be important. And whether you're looking at traditional systems like traditional Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, which comes out of the Vedas and Hinduism, or New Age modalities, you will see this as a pattern, that personality can play into health. The elements or humours of personality, the 4 elements, can play into health. That your emotions and your feelings and your moods can play into health. And that your thoughts can play into health.
Exactly, it all starts with the thoughts.
Yes?
Yeah, and the pressures you're under. If that's alleviated, then you might see a change in health automatically without even having to look at holistic medicine.
Yeah, well, that is, I would consider that holistic medicine. Mm. And anybody who has that view, that paradigm, that treating the whole patient multidimensionally, vertically, as well as horizontally through their relationships, would be a holistic healer. But some holistic healers would focus on the physical body and what's so-called the etheric. And this is what's controversial, because the etheric is closely associated with the physical, but it can't be empirically validated really. Because people don't see it, they tend to think it doesn't exist. The etheric has been posited as containing energy centers, sometimes called chakras, and meridian lines and nodes along which energy flows. And energy has been given different names: chi and prana and orgone energy and libido. But certainly most normal allopathic scientific practitioners would acknowledge that there's an electromagnetic field associated with the physical body. And in radionics therapy, this field is influenced. You can play with this field with magnets and pulses and so on, and observe some effects. Also, for thousands of years they've been doing acupuncture on these meridian lines. And again, it's a bit obscure, but more and more Western doctors are taking a component of acupuncture on as a complementary healing modality. They're looking for extras when the normal things, the normal allopathic remedies don't work. These extras are good if they will do no harm and they're non-invasive, but they might do some good. Extras like acupuncture or Ayurveda. So often we're left in the position of not being able to see these subtle currents, just as with the earth. We talked about the telluric currents. When we're talking signs and seasons, we talked about the ley lines on the earth, which are not visible like trenches in the ground or rivers or streams, but they are subtle. They are posited as structures that are intermediate between the gross visible world and what we may call the psychical world, which is invisible. Because let's face it, you can't see the human psyche, you can't see thoughts and feelings, you see the outer effects. You might see me getting angry or mad, that's an outer effect. But it's not a direct insight into the feeling underlying it. Similarly, you might see brainwave patterns on an electroencephalogram. Indication of thinking, but you don't actually see the thinking and the thoughts because they're not spatio-temporal in the same way that the brain in this brain box here is spatio-temporal. It's matter and it occupies space. So we're talking of different dimensions, aren't we? But it seems eminently reasonable that these different dimensions should have points of connection, does it not? We'd be really odd conglomerations if we were like a ghost in a machine, to use the Cartesian term. The body is a machine just operating on its own, and our inner being, consciousness, is just like this ghost loosely attached, but it doesn't have much to do with the operation of the body. That doesn't seem to be a very serviceable model of how the inner and the outer can relate. And I don't think René Descartes believed that it was either, because in his writings he posits the pineal gland in the middle of the head as a kind of interface junction between the soul and the body. It's still quite a dualistic model because there's the soul and the body and they can meet at this pineal gland and therefore influence each other. Influences can pass from the body up to the soul. And by soul I mean if you don't use that idiom, you might think of it in terms of psyche or consciousness, the intangible part of human life, which is interior and which contains our thoughts and feelings and aspirations and hopes and prayers and all of that, all of what goes on in consciousness. So there at the pineal, Descartes would have imagined influences can pass from the body to the soul or from the soul to the body. He's given us one point of contact, but the practitioners, the traditional practitioners of spiritual healing or esoteric healing, they see many more points of contact, and distribution points, 7 main distribution points, which serve as transformers and transducers and can step down the energy from higher planes of being, that is to say more interior planes of being, into the physical. And these 7 centres, again, cannot be empirically located in the physical body, but they externalise. That is to say, the sites of their principal effects are the endocrine glands and the nerve plexuses closely associated with them. We are talking glands like the adrenal glands, the testes in the male and the ovaries in the female, the pancreas. And remember, in the pancreas, there's an endocrine portion called
pancreas is a gland?
Well, there are glands in the pancreas called the islets of Langerhans that produce insulin that's critical in diabetic patients. It's critical for regulating blood sugar. So not all of the pancreas is endocrine gland. The difference between an ordinary gland and an endocrine gland is that the ordinary gland delivers its enzymes or its proteins down a duct, like a tear gland, okay? The tears run down a duct. But the endocrine glands dump their product directly into the bloodstream. And so they have, there's these hormones from the endocrine glands can travel rapidly through the whole body via the bloodstream and have widely diffuse effects on multiple systems.
Wow, the body is incredible.
Yeah. So the insulin does that because it can travel through the blood and have an instant, more or less instant effect on your blood sugar level. Then the thymus gland in the chest, which has to do with the immune system, the thyroid gland, and of course the thyroid gland has its own hormone, thyroxine, but it's also got parathyroid glands on either side of it, which have other hormones. And this is particularly to do with metabolism. And then you've got your pituitary gland, which is a master controller gland, because there are chemical messengers from here that go to the other endocrine glands and regulate their output. At puberty, for example, a hormone will come from the pituitary and stimulate the testes and the ovaries to get them making their hormones, which then lead to secondary sexual characteristics in the male and in the female. And then the pineal gland, which Descartes was talking about, in the centre of the head, in a little sort of cave of bone, in a little nook of bone. It's sitting there, and it has to do with, is it the melatonin that is produced there? And that has to do with regulating our diurnal rhythms. So it's to do with our body's response, our body clock, our body's response to light and dark. When we travel by jet across a number of timelines and get to our destination, our body clock is out. The body's not sure when we're supposed to sleep or not, and when we're supposed to be awake. There's an adjustment period because the body clock is out and it needs to be reset. And the pineal gland has a lot to do with that function.
Gets you out of your jet lag.
Yes. So one way of bridging this gap between the allopathic and the holistic is to actually start with something that we can physically observe in the action of the endocrine glands. Instead of talking about what's behind them, just talk about there, because we can see these endocrine glands. We can cut open the human body and see them, and we can chemically measure what hormones they're putting out. But then, on the other hand, we shouldn't immediately shy away from positing and theorizing and testing things that are hidden, occult in the pure sense of the term, that is to say hidden, unmanifest. Doesn't conventional science do that after all? The atoms that science posits, we don't actually see them, and especially the subatomic particles. The whole physical theory of the world is built on subatomic particles, but we can't see them, touch them, taste them. They're effectively occult. We can't even see them through the most powerful microscopes. We might be able to see a cell, but once we get down to the molecular and the atomic level, we can't see these entities that science tells us are there. Is it any different from acupuncture meridians or ley lines? Is it any different from chakras and nadis? Do you see my point? Even on the macro scale of the universe, cosmologists and astrophysicists have to posit a thing, well, dark energy and dark matter, to account for
There's things that you just can't see.
No, you can't see them.
But they do exist.
They posit them to satisfy their mathematical equations, because there's just not enough mass in the universe to account for this accelerating expansion of the universe that seems to be happening. Therefore, there must be more matter, but we just can't see it, says the physicist. We're not talking about the witch doctor here, we're talking about the physicist. And so the physicists say, well, this matter that we see through the universe, on the earth, the matter of our bodies, all the way up to the stars and galaxies, that is just, 5-10% of all the matter in the universe. It's visible, but by far the larger proportion is invisible. And they call it dark energy and dark matter. So let's not give ourselves too hard a time for positing occult entities. Every system seems to need them, because if you're going to give deep explanations for why things happen, you inevitably get to a level of causes which are hidden in relation to what's manifest. And what's manifest will be the effects, the measurable effects of hidden causes. And that applies whether we're talking physics or metaphysics, whether we're talking nuclear medicine or traditional indigenous healing. Have you considered that there is so much that science itself just asks us to believe that we can't touch, taste, hear or see?
Of course.
When we turn on the light, electric light, we see light, and depending on the kind of bulb or tube it is, we get a level of other radiation, heat, infrared. I can feel the warmth, I can see the light. But where's the electricity? I don't actually see the electricity, do I? I can't touch it, I can't taste it. But what I do register are the effects of the electricity.
Result.
As these posited electrons make their way through their wire coils or whatever, their filaments, there are effects thrown off, and I see the light, I feel the radiation, but I don't actually see these entities that are responsible for causing it in the first place.
Creating it.
Mm-hmm. So this is a reasonable comeback to anybody who says that, oh, the system of subtle energies, subtle bodies and so on that's used in spiritual healing is mumbo jumbo. It's all, you can't see it, you can't touch it, there's no way of proving it. Well, it's rather like modern physics and science. A lot of stuff is posited as causative in a hidden realm, but we see the effects. I think we might leave it at there for now.